The 100 Breeders Thought Experiment, aka Who Pays? Pinky, attend. Tonight's experiment requires no lasers, only arithmetic and a conscience. We will price the Disneyland Family Fantasy, the smiling brochure version of breeding. We'll run it at scale. 100 adults press Create Person once. No consent forms, no opt-outs. Just 100 unchosen lives hurled into the meat grinder of probability because the adults want Christmas photos. Now the receipt. When you mint 100 people, you don't mint 100 Hallmark movies. You mint 100 liabilities. And at that scale, certain harms are not maybe. They're baked in. Here is the minimum basket you are buying so a handful of families can post matching t-shirt photos in front of a cartoon castle. At least one will be raped or sexually assaulted. Non-graphic, horrifying, real. At least one will be maimed in a serious accident. Bone, brain, or spine never the same. At least one will be diagnosed with a catastrophic illness in childhood. Oncology wards do not decorate themselves. At least one will develop a severe mental illness that turns reality into a funhouse mirror. At least one will attempt suicide. Some will succeed. At least one will fall into addiction and spend a decade negotiating with a chemical tyrant. At least one will be abused by a caregiver, the monster living down the hall, not under the bed. At least one will be born with a serious disability requiring lifelong care and fighting bureaucracies. At least one will grow up in poverty or experience homelessness, because you don't control macroeconomics with a baby shower. At least one will bury a parent out of order and have their childhood detonated by grief. And many, many will live fine with scars, which is the statistical median you hide behind when you don't want to know names. That is the entry fee, the price of admission for your legacy, your stroller unboxing, it just feels natural. You cannot personally pay this bill. You cannot swap bodies with the child when the IV needle goes in, or the hands close around their throat, or the dashboard comes through the windshield. You bought the ticket. They ride the roller coaster. Not my kid, says the brochure reader. That is not a defense. That is an indictment. It means you're perfectly content for those lines on the invoice to land on someone else's child, so long as your ride is magical. That is not ethics. That is outsourcing harm to strangers you manufactured. Let us perform 3 idiot-proof checks. Consent test. If I, a small but superior mouse, asked you to sign, expose me to a non-trivial chance of lifelong agony so you can feel fulfilled, would you sign? No? Then you cannot sign for an unconsenting person you haven't created yet. Specificity test. Keep the list. Point. Actually point. To which of the 100 children gets raped, which gets the crash, which gets the cancer, which gets the psychosis. Look them in the eye and say, I did this because I wanted Christmas morning. If you cannot do that, you're hiding behind averages like a coward. Swap test. If your own child drew the black ticket, would you still call the initial act moral? If your answer flips when it's your skin, you never had a principle, only self-exemption. But brain? Most turn out fine. Fine is not consent. Fine includes scars, no statistic tracks. The chronic illness managed, the funeral programs saved in drawers, the dread that sits on chests at 3 a.m. Even granting a generous bell curve of okay, the act remains the same. You assign the entire risk distribution to someone who cannot refuse so that you can cosplay purpose. Understand? This is not about whether love exists. Love exists. It is wonderful. It is also not a retroactive permission slip. Loving the person you created does not launder the decision to impose being that person with all attached hazards for your dream. So here is your final crystal clear invoice for the Disneyland Fantasy of 100 Breeders. Charge, parent feelings, and family content. Payment method, 100 unconsenting bodies. Line items, minimum. Rape, maiming, cancer, psychosis, suicide attempts, addiction, domestic abuse, disability, poverty, early bereavement, and a chorus of fine with scars. Payer, the children, not you. Tip, spare me. And finally, the only ethical way to avoid billing a stranger for your amusement is don't press the button. Decline the ride. Let the castle remain a painting. For once, The plan that doesn't require taking over the world, only refusing to manufacture more of it. Sure.